Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name's Deepesh Patel, editor at Trade Finance Global and host of Trade Finance Talks TV. Today, we're talking about cash. Cash is still king, particularly during these times of tight liquidity, where corporate treasurers have an ever-challenging role within their business. Charting this uncertain landscape during the coronavirus pandemic is hard enough, but banks need to keep up with ever-increasing regulatory requirements, the rapid transition towards cashless transactions, as well as the growing demand for 24/7 instant real-time payments. So here with us today, live at BAFT's Global Payments Conference, I'm joined by Philip Bowkley, who sits on BAFT's Global Payments Industry Council and is also head of financial institutions groups at Barclays. Today we're discussing the future of global payments, cash and liquidity. Philip, a very warm welcome to you on Trade Finance Talks TV.
Deepesh, and really pleased to be here today to talk about BAFT and about the changing payments landscape.
So let's start with an introduction, and if you could give a very quick 30-second elevator pitch. Who are you, where are you from, and what do you do?
So Philip Bowkley, and as you said, I head up the FIG business at Barclays International Corporate Bank. So what does that mean? That means that myself and my teams globally are responsible for the relationships and the coverage that we have with both banks and financial institutions, but also non-bank financial institutions around the world. We provide corporate banking solutions and transactional banking solutions to both banks, but also non-bank payments companies and service providers and regulated fintechs. And as you say, I'm part of the BAFT Global Payments Industry Council, and I'm actually a co-chair of the Global Payments Conference this week.
Let's focus on the Global Payments Industry Council, and it was just launched a few months ago. You're one of the co-chairs alongside David Kretz. Can you explain the working group?
Sure. So it's an exciting time in payments, and the industry landscape's really evolving quickly. The Global Payment Industry Council, or GPIC as we like to call it, is really set up to provide thought leadership for the industry, and is going to drive the dialogue on innovative solutions to challenges facing the global payments industry. And it provides a platform to exchange ideas to strengthen the resilience of the industry. And really its primary purpose is to set BAFT's strategic agenda with respect to global payments, and to ensure alignment of BAFT's payment committees and various working groups. GPIC's made up of 20 executives of BAFT members, member organizations, and it's really good. We've got a great broad sort of geographical spread, including Africa, Asia Pacific, Europe, MENA, and North America. GPIC's top three priorities are to interface with regulators, and market infrastructures to develop a cohesive approach to the use of ISO 20022 structured data. Our second priority is to ensure a standard approach with regard to the origination, processing, and delivery of faster payments, really focusing on the anti-money laundering laws, regulations, and to ensure that they're interpreted and applied consistently across the industry. And then the third priority is to review the operating rules of the various national and regional payment schemes to identify the approaches that best facilitate cross-border interoperability.
So 2020 has been challenging to say the least. How has the COVID-19 pandemic affected payments, both from a corporate and also from a bank perspective?
Yeah, well, look, Deepesh, as you say, I think, coming into 2020, I don't think any of us on New Year's Eve kind of envisaged how the year was going to turn out. And it's certainly, been really challenging. I think, we've seen in the news, the pandemic's caused, some really significant changes and challenges to certain industry sectors and supply chains, obviously, for example, hospitality and tourism. But I think we've also seen other areas of the economy really thrive and grow. For example, e-commerce and kind of platform businesses have definitely been one of the sort of growths and successes. And frankly, one of the areas that I think's kind of kept us all functioning and sort of supported our everyday lives. despite the unprecedented situation, I think we've seen banks and supply chains and corporates really react quickly to the challenges of lockdown and remote working. I would say that banks and the payments industry more broadly has reacted well, enabling commerce to continue to flow. Banks and the finance industry, I think, working together with governments and central banks around the world, have really enabled the support stimulus to flow to these businesses or those businesses most needing it. And I think that continues to be a focus. I think more specifically, thinking about banking, the pandemic has really driven some changes to the payments and corporate banking landscape, which I would view actually as some positives. So I think, we've definitely seen an acceleration of a sort of move to digital channels, self-service, improving straight-through processing rates. I think we've seen a focus on enabling high-growth e-commerce and platform businesses, either directly or with banks working with fintechs to enable sort of fast, secure, and transparent payment solutions. We've seen changing consumer behaviors, and I think that's driving expectations in terms of B2B business models, B2C business models. And in turn, I think, the expectations on payments capabilities. For example, we're definitely seeing a demand for instant payments, instant cross-border payment solutions, and a demand for increased transparency and speed.
Now, I guess going into a bit more detail on that, has it been a time for fintechs to offer value to payments platforms and banks?
Yeah, I definitely think it has, Deepesh. I mean, we've seen this in a mix of the speakers this week, I think. And, I think more than ever, I think, the sort of fintech angle has been very visible in the conference this week. Whilst traditional correspondent banking and payment solutions remain important, and we've definitely seen a high growth, we've definitely also seen a high growth in alternative payment models, which really are focused on improving speed, removing friction, particularly from sort of cross-border payments and e-commerce. And I think also enabling reconciliation, for example, and data movement at a lower cost. So to give you an example, if you're an SME in Asia making PPE equipment, which is obviously topical, and you want to quickly distribute that to multiple countries via, for example, e-commerce platforms, the traditional models of requiring you to sort of set up bank accounts in various countries to receive funds, make international cross-border payments can be quite costly, cumbersome, and actually take a lot of time to set up. One of the things we've seen, I think, is, some very innovative fintech and PSP solutions that have been created, which enable this type of commerce to flow, much more quickly, effectively, and can provide better real-time reconciliation to both the e-commerce platforms, but also the merchants or manufacturers.
Let's talk about cash management and treasury. And I guess we've talked about it from a fintech and technology perspective. But what have been the most challenging issues from a bank perspective to support their corporate customers during the pandemic? Can you give any examples?
Yeah, so look, I think maybe I'll start off on a sort of personal level, and I think a lot of people, watching today all relate to this. I think, for banks, I think, working from home, right, for 12 months. For me personally, I compete with my wife and my kids for broadband. Trying to keep the dog off the video conference whilst also kind of providing seamless service to clients, I think. And our corporate customers is a challenge that I think millions of us around the world are facing on a daily basis. I think, again, on a sort of more personal level, I think we all really miss the face-to-face interaction and the kind of innovation that drives when we can talk to colleagues and clients directly. But that said, I do think the industry is, really adapted incredibly well. For banks, we operate complex businesses with processes that span multiple channels, locations, and geographies. And trust and service is absolutely key in everything we do. So overnight, we've moved not just Barclays, but all of the banks present at the conference and globally, right? We've had to move thousands of colleagues to work from home, whilst not missing a beat in terms of continuing to process millions of payments and transactions for our clients daily. I think this has been an amazing achievement. It was untested at that kind of scale, but it's definitely worked, and it's been, incredible, I think. And I think our corporate clients as well across every sector have had to do the same. And I do think, sometimes we should sit back and reflect on that. And I think the industry and our clients should be proud of what we've achieved, in an unprecedented situation and really in a very fast time scale. Other things that we've seen are definitely an accelerating investment, as I said, in electronic platforms, electronic solutions and channels, and self-service. And I think this has really been important to both banks and our clients as we move to a sort of secure remote working from home environment. That functionality is absolutely key. It's also been very key in terms of, I think, not just from a business continuity perspective, but I think fraud has also been a key driver. Fraudsters are smart and innovative, and they've definitely seen opportunities in COVID and the new ways of working for banks and our clients, right? And in terms of exploiting, gaps in processes that were maybe not designed for sort of remote working. So I think, driving those sort of electronic and self-service channels in a secure way and investing in those has definitely been a key topic. I also think another area where, we've been, or the banking industry and the finance industry have been key in supporting the real economy and our clients is sort of working in conjunction with governments and central bank lending schemes, and really being the channel by which this support can quickly and effectively get to the right businesses and sectors in the economy. Again, this was untested at scale, but I think banks and fintechs, governments and central regulators have worked really well together to kind of make that flow effectively and play that vital role in terms of supporting corporates, SMEs, etc., through the industry.
Now, you mentioned those top 3 priorities for GPIC earlier on in the recording. So interfacing with regulators, developing standards for real-time payments, and resolving exceptions for payments processing. Let's take a deep dive into the regulatory piece. Can you explain, what's happening and what are the biggest challenges, even if it's just at a high level?
Yeah, Deepesh, there's probably a couple of things that I think I've mentioned that are really topical. I think, just with the speed of change in the payments industry, clearly moving very quickly towards sort of instant cross-border payments, new infrastructure and regulation coming in at pace around the world. I think, really, banks and I think BAFT and the payments industry definitely welcome regulation. Regulation is a good thing. But I think really there's a role for BAFT to play, ensuring that regulation is kind of consistent and as far as possible, I think, regulation that is coordinated and applied consistently internationally, I think is very helpful to the industry. So I think, BAFT has definitely got a key role to play there. I think one of the other things I mentioned is we're definitely seeing more regulatory focus on the non-bank payments companies and MSBs. In addition to the sort of focus that I think we as banks are used to. And I think this is in the wake of some of the sort of high profile failures in the industry last year. I think, for example, we're going to see a convergence in terms of the regulatory environment and how it's applied to non-bank payment companies. And they'll be held to sort of similar standards as the international banks. And I think, particularly around areas like client money, onboarding, and AML processes. And I think, more broadly, again, I think both, a lot of the fintech payment companies I talk to, and certainly the banks that I talk to, I think we welcome that kind of move.
Now, we're very proud partners of BAFT's Global Payments Conference. Can you explain and talk us through some of the main themes, some of the insights over the course of these 3 days for us?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I think maybe to start off by saying, the conference is virtual this year, which I think, whilst we undoubtedly have all missed being together physically and being able to sort of network and exchange ideas and insights over maybe a social drink after the conference, I think actually the virtual format definitely has some advantages as well. And you'll have seen just from the range of speakers and the subject matter over the 3 days, I think we've really managed to get probably more of a global feel to the conference than if it's a physical event. And I think having those sort of international viewpoints and speakers and also attendees is really good. We've talked about some of the themes already, but I think, the pace of change in cross-border and domestic payments is definitely a theme. And at the conference, we've heard that from banks, we've heard it from fintechs, and we've heard it from the market infrastructure and some of the technology providers as well. With this pace of change, definitely comes opportunities, but also some challenges. Again, we just talked about some of the challenges that poses in the sort of regulatory environment. But I think also kind of coordination is key, just to make sure that we don't end up creating more additional cost and complexity. And I think BAFT has a key role to play in that. Keeping the whole critical and sort of complex ecosystem reliable and safe and resilient. Contingency, fraud, cybercrime prevention. I think we've heard a lot about that as well in the conference. And I think, that's going to continue to be a theme for the payments industry. And I think there's a role for every player to play there. There's been less focus, interestingly, on cryptocurrency, I would say, this year. But I think there's definitely still real interest in the underlying technology and the potential role that central bank digital currencies can play. So, will they become more widely adopted and a reality? What opportunities does that bring, and potentially what problems does that help us all solve? Is definitely a topic. And then I think, the interest and the opportunity and the sort of collaboration between banks and fintechs more broadly is an ongoing topic, and there's been several sessions at the conference around that.
Thank you very much, Philip. And yes, indeed, we could probably talk for a whole session on central bank digital currencies and cryptocurrencies. There is one to come on that. Thank you so much for joining us on Trade Finance Talks TV. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but be sure to check out the replays and the videos from the BAFT payments conference on BAFT's website. Philip, thanks for joining us. Take care.
Great. And thank you, Deepesh. Really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.